What's up, Big Blue Nation? Alex Frank here, Cat Scratch Podcast on a Monday, February 10th, 2025. Kentucky bouncing back in a big way. 23-point win over South Carolina, 80-57 on Saturday afternoon, getting back to 500 in the SEC. We're going to talk about my takeaways from the game, what constitutes a successful season for the Kentucky Wildcats in year one under Mark Pope, and looking ahead to tomorrow night's game, a huge one against the Tennessee Volunteers, a team Kentucky already beat earlier this season, just 2 weeks ago, 78-73 in Knoxville. Now, the return game at Rupp Arena, a chance to complete a season sweep of the Tennessee Volunteers. So let's go to Kentucky's win over South Carolina on Saturday afternoon, 80-57. Once again, this is the Cat Scratch Podcast, powered by CLNS Media. I'm Alex Frank, covering the Kentucky Wildcats for CLNS Media. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Alex Frank, and follow us on Twitter at CLNS Media. So, Kentucky, and you can also read all of our Kentucky coverage on CLNSCincy.com. So, Kentucky bounces back. They get their 16th win overall in the season. They get their 5th win in SEC play. They're now 5-5 in the SEC, which in this SEC and with the first-year head coach and a completely revamped roster is good. It may not be what Big Blue Nation and Kentucky fans are used to seeing, and I understand that. There are high expectations that come with being the head coach and playing for the University of Kentucky. But I think it's important to remember that this is still realistically a season of transition, and the SEC is ridiculously good. And when you have a first-year head coach, when you have a completely revamped roster, you're going to go through some growing pains. I think what happened was Kentucky's wins over Duke and Gonzaga and Florida earlier in the season raised expectations and then just, I think, put off the transition and the growing pains. And then those happened and when they lost 4 out of 5 games. Now, could they have won the Alabama, the Vanderbilt, the Arkansas games? Absolutely. The only really bad game they played in that stretch from start to finish was Ole Miss. But to be able to bounce back from that, and Lamont Butler, I mean, let's be honest, he was a difference maker on Saturday afternoon. Getting him back was crucial for this team as they look to make a deep run into March. Lamont Butler on Saturday had 8 points. He was 2 for 5 from the field. He only had 1 rebound, but he had 3 assists. He had a steal. And you see Kentucky defensively look so much better. They look so much more active. They look so much more cohesive. They look so much more just getting to the ball and making it hard for teams to score on them. South Carolina, and look, South Carolina's struggling. They're having a very difficult season. That team still plays hard for Lamont Paris. They kept that game close through the first half. Kentucky pulled away in the second half. The box score was 33-19 at the end of the first half. It wasn't until the last few minutes where Kentucky really started to pull away. For a while, I for one was nervous watching the game and thinking to myself, gosh, is Kentucky going to let South Carolina hang around the entire game? But Kentucky was able to knock down some threes. They were able to get some stops defensively. And they were really able to put South Carolina behind the 8 ball. South Carolina on Saturday shot just 32.8% from the floor overall and just 4 of 22 from 3. It was a rough afternoon for them. And they've had a very difficult season. They're overmatched. I was talking about this with somebody Saturday night, and they asked me what I thought about South Carolina. And I said, well, I think they play really hard. I think they're well coached. I think they're extremely physical. They're just overmatched. You know, they're not like an Ole Miss where you have 7 players that can score and shoot. They only have 2 of those. Give Colin Murray-Boyle some credit. He had a nice game, 14 points, 5 of 13 from the floor. He did make a 3, only his 6th 3 of the season. But for the most part, Kentucky did a really good job of not letting South Carolina, when the game was hanging in the balance, the Wildcats took control of the game. At the end of the first half and into the second half, they dominated points in the paint, 44-26. Bench points was really a difference maker in this game, 39-4 Kentucky dominating bench points in this game. And then you look at the box score. You got 9 points from Andrew Carr, 10 points from Kobe Brea, 15 points from Brandon Garrison. So that's 34 points right there off the bench. And then Trent Noah even gave you 5 points. And he played over 12 minutes. So I was really happy to see the balanced scoring in this game. Four scores in double figures. Kentucky winning the rebound battle, 41-35. I was really happy to see just a Kentucky team and Lamont Butler makes a huge difference. When you get back a player that's won 2 Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year awards, and a player who has been on the biggest stage, he's played the national championship, he hit a buzzer beater in the Final Four 2 years ago for San Diego State. A guy that has, it's not like, did San Diego State get a little lucky in their run to the national championship game? Yeah. National championships, Roy Williams has said this, there's luck involved. You can have all the ingredients in the world to win a national championship. Scoring, shooting, great defense, rebounding, etc. There's also a little luck involved. They beat Alabama. They dominated Alabama in the Sweet 16. They beat Creighton by 1. So they got a favorable matchup in the Elite 8 and the Final Four. And then they also didn't have to play Virginia in the second round of the NCAA tournament that year. They got Furman, and they crushed Furman. So teams do get luck. But San Diego State is a very, very good basketball program. You can classify a team high major, mid major. You can classify them as elite, very good. I would put San Diego State in the elite mid-major category. You could almost say San Diego State's a high major program. When you have a player like Lamont Butler come to Kentucky from that kind of program, that gives this team a much-needed veteran dimension, right? We can talk about dimensions on the court, X's and O's. When you have a veteran dimension like Lamont Butler, it just makes this team so much better and so much more experienced and dangerous because he's been there before. And was he the biggest reason why Kentucky won this game on Saturday? No, but he was a huge reason why they did. A huge reason why Kentucky's defense was so much improved from Ole Miss to South Carolina. Now, are they going to get tested on Tuesday night against Tennessee? Absolutely. But having Lamont Butler back against a team that you already beat without him, yeah, winning does a lot of good things, right? They say winning cures all. And right now, the Kentucky winning by 23, again, now you see it through the lens of, hey, this team already beat Tennessee without Lamont Butler. They also have some other really good wins without him. They beat Gonzaga without him. With him, they beat Duke. They beat Florida, who just beat Auburn on the road. So, again, nothing. I heard this once from a podcast host who said, nothing's ever as great as it seems, or nothing's ever as bad as it seems. Right. It's always like, teams always talk about how they're trying to be down the middle, rational. They're trying to, not get too high or get too low. Like, they say those things for a reason. And anyone can say that those are cliche, it's coach speak, etc. And yes, there's some truth to that. But having played sports myself and being a sports fan and being a fan of the teams that I cover, and also just being a fan of the teams that I grew up rooting for and still do, yeah, there is a lot of, belief in the fact that you as a fan, you don't want to get too high, you don't want to think it's, the greatest thing ever, and you don't want to get too low thinking it's the worst thing in the world. Like, those things do matter. And Kentucky was in a losing streak, or I should say a slump. They had lost 4 out of 5. They had two-game losing streaks. But now they've won. They're back to 500 in the SEC. They're 5-5 in conference play. They're 16-7 overall. Like, 16-7 is good. With the wins that you have this season. The A&M win back on January 14th. That's a really good win. Like, look at the way Texas A&M has played. I watched their game against Missouri after the Kentucky game on Saturday. That Texas A&M team can play. That A&M team can rebound as well as any team in the country. They're extremely physical. They have some good shooters. They have guys who can score. They also have a team that has players that have been there before. They should have beaten Houston last year in the second round. Would not be shocked at all if you look up come the second weekend of the NCAA tournament and you see them in the Sweet 16. Buzz Williams is also a really good head coach, a head coach who I think is underrated, not just in the SEC, but in all of college basketball. Kentucky beat that team by 13 points earlier this year. And so your wins are starting to look better. Your losses even aren't looking that bad. Now, the Arkansas loss was bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? But Arkansas won their next game after beating Kentucky. They took Alabama to the wire on Saturday. They're 3-7 in the SEC, but, they've kind of played their way back onto the bubble. So that loss, not nearly as bad as we thought it was. It's still a bad loss. But again, Kentucky now with a win, some momentum, some belief going into tomorrow's game against our Tuesday night's game against Tennessee. And it's a big game, and we're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about why coming up here in just a few minutes. So, I really like the balanced game in terms of scoring and production. How about Brandon Garrison? Here's a guy where you look at this roster and who are the main players, like the players, and I think opposing teams and members of the media who cover those teams, particularly in the SEC, will say Jackson Robinson, Otega Owe. They'll say Lamont Butler, and then you can debate who else going down the line. But I think Brandon Garrison has to be one of those guys mentioned because he is so good when he comes off the bench. On Saturday, he gave you 15 points. He gave you 7 of 8 shooting from the floor. He gave you 2 blocks. Like, Brandon Garrison was a McDonald's All-American going into his freshman season at Oklahoma State. He transfers this year to Kentucky. We really haven't, seen him have that breakout game, that huge game that puts him on the radar and higher up on opposing team scouting reports. But what we are seeing is a guy that provides depth. It's a guy that provides energy off the bench. He's going to play hard. That's the kind of guy that I really like watching play. And I thought he was tremendous. Now, was his performance on Saturday due to the fact that it was South Carolina, Kentucky was winning by a lot of points? Maybe. But 15 points on 7 of 8 shooting, I'm never going to say that that's bad. That's a really good performance. Amari Williams is another guy who's rising on opposing team scouting reports. He, on Saturday, 10 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 4 of 9 from the floor, played 21 minutes and 20 seconds, plus minus 32 to lead the team. He just keeps getting better and better, and he makes impacts in so many ways. It's really, really fun to watch him grow into his role. And here's a guy like I have said, and I said this last week, here's a guy that was a 3-time CAA Defensive Player of the Year. He was a 3-time leader in the CAA in block shots. So here's a guy that has a lot of experience. And look, going from making the leap from Drexel to Kentucky, that's a pretty big leap, right? You're going from the CAA to the SEC. But he's a very experienced player. And I think what Mark Pope and the coaching staff have done is they've brought him along gradually. Like, he wasn't making huge impacts early, but you're seeing now how important he is to this team. The experience he brings, the versatility he brings, the fact that he's willing to play so many different roles, just a tremendous growth and development that Amari Williams has had this season with this Kentucky team. Kobe Brea had 5 rebounds on Saturday. That was really impressive. You don't really think of Kobe Brea as a rebounder, but for him to pull down 5 rebounds and have 10 points, made 2 threes. Once he started knocking down threes, I felt like Kentucky was really starting to get going offensively. So if he's going to bring versatility, if he's going to bring another dimension to his game, if it's rebounding, that only makes this team better. I mean, even Jackson Robinson was impacting the game in multiple ways on Saturday. The shots weren't falling for him. He only had 6 points, but he had 5 rebounds. He had 4 assists, plus minus of 11. He was only 2 away from the floor, but he made 2 threes on 5 3-point attempts. So it just goes back to the fact that this team, and I've said this, and Matt Jones of Kentucky Sports Radio has said this, and I've heard many others who cover the team that I covered the team with have said, this team is at its best when the sum is greater than the parts, right? They have a lot of really good pieces, a lot of experienced pieces, like Williams, like Lamont Butler, like Jackson Robinson, like Kobe Brea, Andrew Carr. Like, they have a lot of experience. But when this team comes together, when it meshes together with what Mark Pope is doing, Mark Pope runs great offensive sets. This Kentucky team is good at cutting. They're good at rebounding. They're good at, getting to the rim. They're good at, playing up tempo, putting pressure on teams by taking 35 threes a game. Even though they haven't gotten to that threshold yet, when they do shoot threes, they put pressure on opposing defenses. I still believe this team is versatile. I believe they can knock down threes with any team in the country. I think they can rebound with any team in the country. I think they can score with any team in the country. When they don't turn the ball over, 19 assists to 9 turnovers on Saturday to follow up 21-8 at Ole Miss on Tuesday night last week. When they're not turning the ball over, they've done a good job of that the last 2 games. They can play with any team in the country. When they don't give teams extra possessions, because this Kentucky team, we've seen how you can beat this Kentucky team. If you are knocking down 3-point shots, like Ole Miss and Arkansas were, or Alabama, or even Florida, you're going to have success against them. But when Kentucky's a connected team defensively, led by Lamont Butler and Amari Williams, this Kentucky team can play with any team in the country. We've seen them we've seen them beat Duke. We've seen them beat Florida. We've seen them beat Tennessee. They can play with any team in the country. They're that good. All right. So I've been thinking about this, and I've thought about this, ever since I went to Knoxville to cover the Kentucky game against Tennessee. Kentucky won that game 78-73. It was a great performance. Without Lamont Butler, without Kirk Caruso, once again, this is the Cat Scratch Podcast, powered by CLNS Media, covering the Kentucky Wildcats. I'm Alex Frank, covering the Kentucky Wildcats for CLNS Media. All of our Kentucky coverage at clnscincy.com. Kentucky in their first season with Mark Pope. Look, it's been a fun season. I'm not going to, sit here and say that it hasn't been a fun season. Even though they've lost 4 of their last 6, still, it's still been a really fun season. Right? The wins over Duke, the wins over Gonzaga, the wins over Florida and A&M and Tennessee. Like, I think it's made us think this is going to be better than what we thought. But it's still important, I think, and what this losing slump has, I think, taught me, and I think a lot of members of Big Blue Nation and those who cover the team, and, listening to others and their shows and their podcasts that cover this team, and, seeing what people are saying on social media and talking with those in basketball circles that I know, I think a lot of people, there's a consensus that Kentucky is still overachieved with Mark Pope and a revamped roster this season. So, because their wins raised expectations, but because the losses have been, I think, just a little more frustrating, not maddening. It's just been frustrating because we know this team is capable of being really good. And Mark Pope knows that. He's acknowledged that he believes this is a really good team. So what constitutes a successful season for the Wildcats in year 1 under Mark Pope, for me, is a Sweet 16 appearance. They haven't been there, Kentucky, in 6 years, which feels like a lifetime. The last time Kentucky was in the Sweet 16, Tyler Hero and P.J. Washington were on that team in 2019, Kentucky losing in overtime to Auburn in the Elite Eight in Kansas City. So they haven't been there in 6 years, but getting to the Sweet 16 this year, it would set in motion that Mark Pope is going to get this program eventually back to the Final Four national championship. Because that's what this program is all about, right? And that's why, again, John Calipari, I think as time heals all wounds, as time goes on, Kentucky fans and Big Blue Nation and all of us are going to realize how great John Calipari was as a head coach. And what he did in getting this Kentucky program back to national relevance. So I look at this season, and given the fact that Kentucky has beaten a lot of really good teams, that they can get to the Sweet 16, they're going to be battle tested going into the SEC tournament. They're going to be battle tested going into the NCAA tournament. And yes, part of this is going to be getting a favorable draw, whether that's where they play, whether it's who they play, who's in their 4-team bracket in the first weekend. But understanding that this is still a program in transition, and we've seen this team exceed the expectations, it's still important to understand the realistic aspect of this season. Right? This team doesn't have a John Wall or a DeMarcus Cousins that the 2010 team had in Calipari's first season. That's why Kentucky was so dang good. They were the second number one seed in the tournament. They went to the Elite Eight and just ran into a very good West Virginia team. This Kentucky team doesn't have a player of John Wall or DeMarcus Cousins' caliber. That's okay. They have a really good team with experience. Butler has been to the national championship game. Kobe Brea was on a Dayton team that won a tournament game last year, came back from down 17, I believe, against Nevada in the first round, and then played Arizona tough in the second round. Jackson Robinson has been in the NCAA tournament with Mark Pope at BYU. Otega Owe has played in the Big 12 with Oklahoma. Amari Williams has been to the NCAA tournament. So Andrew Carr's played for Wake Forest in the ACC. There are guys on this team. Kerr Kriisa was on an Arizona team that went to the Sweet 16 back in 2022, excuse me. You look at this team and you realize why they are, I think, still have the potential to get to the Sweet 16. It's the second weekend, right? If you get to the second weekend, if you get through the chaos and the madness of the first weekend, right, with a revamped roster, that's going to speak a lot of volumes. That's going to put them on the fast track to getting back to the Final Four and show that Mark Pope is going to is going to lead, the Wildcats deep into March on a perennial basis. Let's shift gears to close out today's edition of the Cat Scratch Podcast, powered by CLNS Media. Alex Frank here covering the Kentucky Wildcats for CLNS Media. All of our work on CLNSCincyWithTheY.com. Tuesday night versus Tennessee. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock on ESPN and WLAP 6:30 a.m. in Lexington, all across as well the UK Sports Network. 5:30 pregame with Tom Leach, Jack Goose-Gibbons, and the entire UK Sports Network radio crew. 4:30 KSR pregame show with Matt Jones, KSR with Matt Jones and company after the game. So big night for Big Blue Nation. And yeah, let's not sugarcoat this. This is a huge game. It's a very big game. Tennessee is coming into this game with some momentum. Since Kentucky beat them, and Tennessee was in a slump when Kentucky beat them 2 weeks ago. But Tennessee, since that game, they've won 3 straight games. They have been playing some excellent basketball. In their last 3 games, they've won all 3. They have beaten Florida by 20 without Zakai Ziegler and Igor Milicic. They beat Missouri, a very good Missouri team. Who just beat Mississippi State by 20 on the road. They beat them in a high-scoring game, 85-81. And then they went on the road to Oklahoma, won by 18. So this is a really, really good Volunteers team of late. When Kentucky played them, they were in a stretch of losing 2 of their last 3. They had lost at Vanderbilt. They had beaten Mississippi State at home, which was really good. So, excuse my phone ringing there. So then they lost at Auburn, which was a very, very physical game. They lost by 2 points on the road against the number 1 team in the country at the time. And then they lost to Kentucky. So it's been an up and down season for Tennessee in the SEC. It's been that way for everybody. Tennessee, 20-4 overall, 7-4 in the SEC. They're looking to stay in that race for the SEC regular season title. I don't know if they're going to win it, but if you're Kentucky and you need to win this game, because if you do win this game, You're only a half game behind Tennessee with the season sweep, right? Then that means you can pass them in the SEC standings. Maybe that'll help you get a good seed in the tournament. The top 4 teams in the SEC right now, Auburn, Alabama, they're both 9-1. Florida and Texas A&M, they're both 7-3. So it's going to be somewhat difficult, not somewhat. It's going to be very difficult to get into that top 4. If you can get anywhere between 5 and 8, which right now is Tennessee and Ole Miss at 7-4, Missouri at 6-4, Mississippi State at 5-5. But Vanderbilt and Kentucky are also both 5-5. That's why this game on tomorrow night, Tuesday night, is very, very crucial for Kentucky this season. And in the SEC, it's game number 11. You want to start making that push to the 5 through 8 range in the SEC. You got Vanderbilt next Wednesday. I will most likely be at that game. You have Texas in between Tennessee and Vanderbilt. You still go to Alabama. You're going to get Oklahoma on the road. You're going to get Auburn at home, LSU at home, Missouri on the road. There's still a lot left to go. But if you're Kentucky, you know you can beat this Volunteers team. You just did without Lamont Butler on the road. Now you get them in Rupp Arena. Tennessee is playing this game to stay in the race for a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Like, as of now, I recorded this before the new rankings came out this week for the AP Top 25. Tennessee was number 4 in the country for a reason. They only have 4 losses this season. All 4 of them are in SEC play. Florida, Vanderbilt, Auburn, and Kentucky. Win this game if you're Kentucky, you're going to further prove yourself that you're a really good team and you're overachieving this season. You're going to get back to over 500 in the SEC. You're going to have the sweep over Tennessee. You're going to generate momentum towards a good seed in the SEC tournament. Lose this game, you're facing an uphill battle. 5-6 in the SEC going on the road to face Texas, not an ideal situation. Then you're probably looking at the reality of playing on Wednesday of the SEC tournament. You're going to continue the recent theme of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back if you lose this game. Big game tomorrow night. I'm going to pick Kentucky to win. I think Kentucky holds serve on their home floor in what's going to be a really good game. I think there's going to be a lot of scoring. I'm going to go 82-76. Kentucky beats Tennessee, improves to 17-7, 6-5 in the SEC, and then we'll be back Thursday with hopefully a good game to recap and looking ahead to Saturday against Texas. And I'm going to ask you another question on Thursday that I'm really interested in hearing what all of you, a Big Blue Nation, and whether if you're listening to this, if you're not a Kentucky fan, you just love college basketball, and Kentucky obviously is college basketball royalty. What your opinion is on this question that I'm going to ask you on Thursday's show. Thank you for listening. This has been the Scratch Podcast powered by CLNS Media. I'm Alex Frank covering the Kentucky Wildcats for CLNS Media. Thank you for listening. Have a great rest of your Monday. It's the Monday after the Super Bowl. That was an incredible performance by Philadelphia. It was. And again, like Kentucky, Philadelphia was the sum was greater than the parts. And I say that mainly for their defense, right? You can go through Philadelphia's defense and their best players, Jalen Carter, Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean, Cooper DeJean, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship, all those guys. In terms of best players at every defensive position, all 3 levels in the NFL, you may not name an Eagles player in the first 2 or 3 names. But together, they were the NFL's best defense this season. That's coaching. That's, buying in. That's team over me. It's so great. It was so inspiring to watch a team just collectively dismantle the Kansas City Chiefs. And offensively, Jalen Hurts is the top 3 quarterback. I don't understand. I've never understood the criticism he gets. He's won. All he has done since coming to the NFL is win. Since the Eagles made him the full-time starter in 2021, he's gotten them to the playoffs 4 straight times, 2 Super Bowls, and now a Super Bowl championship. And you look at what the Eagles offense has. Barkley, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, they were both extended last offseason. Lane Johnson's still playing at a high level at right tackle. Jordan Mailata at left tackle. Mekhi Becton at left guard. Right? Cam Jurgens. Drafting, developing, trading, free agency. Howie Roseman and the Eagles front office turn over every leaf and leave no stone unturned. And that's why they are Super Bowl champions for the second time in 8 years. And they very, very well, they can win the Super Bowl again next year, Super Bowl 60 in Santa Clara, California. That's my thoughts, my biggest takeaways from Super Bowl 59. Have a great rest of your Monday. Have a great start to your work week. This has been the Cat Scratch Podcast, covering the Kentucky Wildcats, empowered by CLNS Media. I'm Alex Frank, covering the Kentucky Wildcats for CLNS Media. Thank you for listening. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time right here on the Cat Scratch Podcast.